Okay, so let's talk more about this rollout. Again, coming later tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern. CBS Justice reporter Paula Reid is in Washington. Okay, first of all, Paula, how did the administration go about determining who is allowed, who's not allowed? What legal precedent are they using here?
Well, they're going by what the Supreme Court gave them, which is essentially the third version of the travel ban. The Supreme Court said that they can go ahead and enforce this policy, barring people from these 6 countries, unless someone has a bona fide relationship to the United States. But the Supreme Court didn't define specifically what that meant. So it's ultimately up to the administration, and they've come up with these guidelines. For example, if you have an offer of employment here in the U.S., if you are a student enrolled in a school, but then the family relationships, that's where they had to sort of split some hairs. And it's clear not everyone will agree with their definition. For example, grandparents are not considered a bona fide relationship, nor are fiancés, but a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law or a sibling is. So, you know, of course, this is definitely destined for more court action.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Will there be some challenges? And do you think that those challenges will have any chance of finding a favorable court, given the fact that the United States Supreme Court that has handed down a lot of this?
These are absolutely going to be challenged in the courts, the specific definitions, so jumping off of what the Supreme Court gave them. This has been a constant theme. Almost every policy that the Trump administration has put forth has wound up in court. Part of that is because that's really the only recourse that Democrats have against policies they don't like. It's litigation. I do think some courts may be willing to look at certain cases, particularly any that have to do with children or elderly relatives, especially if there's a medical condition involved. It is very likely some lawsuits have already been filed and more will come. And it is likely that some judges will be looking to take a look, not so much about whether the travel ban should be in place, but about this specific definition of a bona fide relationship.
Now, we all remember, Paula, the chaos that took place at airports around the country when the first travel ban, the executive order, was put into place. Eventually, it was stayed. But what's going to happen when people try to come into this country now and they don't meet the criteria that's been set out, and they're told that they can't come in?
Well, it will be a very interesting 24 hours at the airport. I do not anticipate the kind of chaos that we saw with the first travel ban, because there, for example, I remember calling sources at the Department of Homeland Security and at the airport getting some guidance. They had no guidance. But here they do have much more guidance. With the second iteration of the travel ban, there were specifics, there was procedure, there was a little bit of a time lag so that people had time to implement it. There's a lot more guidance, there's a lot more framework in place. But if you are not someone who is allowed in here under the Supreme Court's ruling, you can try to challenge it if you can prove, if you have enough documents to prove that you have a continued purpose here, that you've continued to do business here, continued to study here. Also, if you have any sort of medical condition, again, you need documents, you can't just make the claim, but if you can prove that,
right,
you might be able to get around it. If not, it's going to be 90 to 120 days, maybe even longer if the Supreme Court extends this.
All right, well, that was my last question for you, Paula. The clock is ticking now, I guess, beginning at 8 o'clock tonight Eastern Time. 90 days and then 120 days for refugees. And then beyond that, the Supreme Court is supposed to hear this in the fall. How does all this play out?
Well, I think some of the justices may hope that this case never comes before them. Because remember, Rick, this was supposed to be a temporary policy. This was a temporary pause on traveling to the U.S. to give the administration a chance to figure out what they want their vetting policy to be going forward. What kind of rules do they want to have in place permanently from people coming from these 6 countries? So the Supreme Court kind of references this in their opinion. They said, hey, look, you're going to have 90, potentially 120 days to work on your rules. And if you come up with some permanent policies, perhaps we will not see one another in October at the High Court. So for some people, there may be relief, but some people, they may have to wait ultimately until the Supreme Court rules, which will probably be a few months after they hear the case in October.
And for some people, they're wondering, why hasn't the administration fixed the vetting process? They've had more than the original 90 days that they asked for, about 150 some odd days ago. Paula Reid joining us from Washington. Paula, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.